Number one, the firewall must come down. It must come down. The people of China, the citizens of China, the decent, hardworking, old 100 names in China have to be able to communicate to the world. They have to get out there and tell them what their situation is. The world has to see this unfiltered by the Chinese Communist Party. And right now, there is no justification, no moral justification to have the firewall up. This is an emergency and it's a humanitarian crisis. The firewall must come down, and any American company that's providing technology or capital or personnel to keep that firewall up is going to burn in hell, okay? Because now they are just prolonging the suffering of the Chinese people. That's number one. Number two, and I said this a couple weeks ago, the Chinese Communist Party must take the best doctors from the world, from the CDC, the World Health Organization, from the Imperial College in London, from Hong Kong University, Dr. Gabriel Leung, the top virus hunters, the best, have to be allowed to get into Wuhan and Hubei province and see and report back exactly what the problem is and what their recommendations are. And number three, the Chinese Communist Party has to be able to accept doctors and nurses from all over the world that would volunteer, military or otherwise, to go to Wuhan and go to Hubei. Because right now we see, I think there's 5,000 doctors and nurses that are infected, okay? The new crisis you have is a collapse of the public health system in the central province and in Wuhan city. If that collapses, you can have tens of millions of people die. And that is something the CCP can avoid by taking nurses and doctors from all over the world and let them go to those central things. Until the government does that, to me, it's showing that two things. Number one, they don't care about the Chinese people. They don't care how many people die. And number two, they don't care about people throughout the world. What they care about is what they've always cared about, and that is their hold on power and their hold on wealth.
China says the coronavirus epidemic is coming down. But is it really so? Steve K. Bannon, host of War Room Pandemic, sat down with me to discuss the most critical aspects of this pandemic. What's the truth in China? Why did the Chinese government still refuse to let American experts in? Could the virus be made in a lab? Why does the Chinese leadership rush biosafety legislation? Could America see generic drug shortages if the epidemic prolongs? I'm Simone Gao, and you are watching Zooming In. Thank you, Mr. Bannon, for being with us again.
Thanks for having me on, Simone.
Okay, so we've been hearing conflicting messages from the Chinese government these days. Well, on one hand, the Politburo sent out a statement that the Wuhan situation is not under control. But if we look at the CDC number from China, just during the last week, the numbers, newly added confirmed cases has been dropping. Every day from a week ago, it was 15,000 newly added cases. Yesterday it was 395. So what is going on?
First of all, every number you're seeing that comes out of the CCP and comes out of China is a total and complete lie. They're all lies. You know, they've tried to go back and have different methodologies about how they're counting this. So people should just discount that. And I know people that watch your show are sophisticated enough to understand the CCP just lies. It's the crime is that the mainstream media in the West repeats these lies over and over and over again. As we sit here today doing this interview, 1/10 of the world's humanity, 10% of the world's humanity is under some form of quarantine in central China. We have anywhere from 60 to 80 million, maybe 100 million people in Hubei and around surrounding areas under a strict quarantine. We have another 4 or 5 or 600 million people throughout the rest of China on some form of lockdown, which is a quasi quarantine. And the reason that is, there's only two ways right now to solve this virus. A vaccine, which a vaccine is anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half, 2 years away. Or what they call social separation, which is quarantine. And what we know is that there are not 700 million people under some form of quarantine with only 70,000 infected. The numbers are huge. Miles Guo says there's millions. Other people, scientists are saying there are hundreds of thousands. The deaths go from anywhere from, Miles Guo says it's over 200,000 to other people are saying it's in the tens of thousands. But one thing I can guarantee you and promise you, that the numbers that the CCP are putting out are total and complete lies. And here's why we know this. Right now, today, when we're doing this interview, just before we started, the Politburo came out and said, quote, "We do not have the situation in Hubei province or in Wuhan under control, and that it is, quote unquote, more complex and more severe than we anticipated." And so they are essentially, which is a huge loss of face, right? And particularly, this is the committee that President Xi, he's the convening authority. He's the top person. He and Wang Xishan. And so for them to put that out for the world's media to see, admitting that they are not on top of this situation in Wuhan, this biblical plague that has infected the poor people of China, is in the mainstream media. It should be outraged that they've taken these lies for so long and just kind of repeated them. And now you're starting to see, I think the lies are coming apart because you can no longer control the information that's coming out of Wuhan. The tragedy of Wuhan, led by one of the stories in your audience should understand that affected people most in the United States, was the chief medical officer for the Wunchang hospital in Wuhan when he died, right, in the line of service to help his fellow countrymen in China. When the ambulance moved away to take his body to be cremated, his poor wife, who's one of the nurses, was banging on the ambulance and crying out for her dead husband. That really hit many Americans in the heart. And so I think you're seeing today that the Chinese Communist Party, who lies about everything, now their lies are being exposed to a global audience.
Mm-hmm. Just last week, I attended a CDC briefing at the National Press Club in the States, in DC, and the spokesperson from the CDC was still praising the Chinese government for transparency and their ability to build those massive hospitals. And she cited the official number from China. So my question is, do you think the American government is aware of the possibility of the scope of this epidemic?
I think there's there's obviously different people in the government. The official policy is to try to be, and one of the reasons I think they've been doing that, and President Trump has been reinforcing that and saying good things about Xi, is they're trying to get the cooperation of the Chinese Communist Party to actually give real information, and most importantly, to allow CDC personnel, virus hunters, in from the World Health Organization, CDC, Hong Kong University, Dr. Gabriel Leung, others that could actually go to Wuhan and start to get their hands around this situation. I think they feel that if they call out the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, for their lies, that it'd be much tougher to get there. There are many people in the government that know that the Chinese Communist Party is lying to people. They're lying about these numbers. They're not being transparent at all. But I believe for the greater good, remember, we can't start to solve this problem. This is Dr. Thay and Lian Chan Han had this two-part articles in The Hill called the Biological Chernobyl, brought on by the CCP. Until we actually get world experts in there to assist the Chinese people and to assist these heroic doctors, you're only going to have this virus is only going to metastasize. The number one priority for everybody is to get there and help the Chinese people, to help stop this in China, and by stopping that, to stop it spreading throughout the world. And so that's what I think President Trump is trying to accomplish. But as everybody that watches your show knows, or goes to NTD TV or goes to the Epoch Times, they understand that the Chinese Communist Party is a collection of gangsters. They think like gangsters, they operate like gangsters, and they don't care. And I've said this many times, they do not care if 25 or 30 million Chinese die in Hubei province or in central China. They could care less. All they care about is holding on to power. And so all you're going to see is a continuation of their lies and their misrepresentations.
Mm-hmm. As you said, 760 million Chinese people are under quarantine, and half China is locked down. But things are not improving. The spread of the virus is not being stopped. What does that tell us?
It tells you that it's out of control. We have a pandemic. Dr. Stephen Hatfield wrote this book, and I recommend everybody in your audience get this. It's called 3 Seconds to Midnight. Dr. Hatfield is one of the world's leading experts here in the United States, one of the top experts on pandemics. In this book, he goes through all the historical pandemics. He wrote this book before this pandemic came out, but it's really scary. And what Dr. Hatfield says, there's only two ways to solve this right now: a vaccine or social separation in a quarantine. He was just on our show, War Room Pandemic, the other day, and what he said was, this is proven because it continues to have to quarantine additional people, that the social separation in central China is not working. And here's why it's not working. Number one, they suppressed the information for too long. They lied to people for too long. So the possibility they had to contain this back in December, the Chinese Communist Party misled everybody and lied about everything. It then has now metastasized, and it's gotten out of control. And the measures they've tried to put in are just not that thorough. You know, you've seen what they've tried to do, and they're just not that on top of things. And so this continues to spread. Dr. Hatfield and many of the experts here think that it's gotten now out of control in China. And one of the things he says, and other people like Miles Gore and myself say, you can tell how out of control it is because no one on that central committee today in Beijing, not one person, and not Wang Xishan and not Xi, have been to Wuhan, right? And the question has to be from the Chinese people, why have their leaders not come to Wuhan to assess the situation in person? There's two reasons. Reason number one, they don't want to be associated with the failures of the quarantine, right? They're firing local party cadres, but they don't want to be associated. Number two, they don't want to die, okay? When you have the senior medical personnel, the doctor that's in charge of the number 1 hospital and the doctor that's really in charge of kind of the overall medicine for the entire and public health safety for the entire region, when he dies by contracting the virus and he's dead, that's why CCP will not go down there. So all of their other talk is happy talk. Until Xi goes to Wuhan and stands at a quarantine center and looks the Chinese people in the eye and says, I'm on top of this and I'm going to be here until this thing is solved, it's all lies. And so every stat they put out, every number they put out, every way they want to spin it is a total and complete lie. This is Beijing, where all the party cadres are. This is Shanghai, where many of the party cadres and the most sophisticated businessmen, when they sit there and they don't believe anything the CCP says, that tells you everything you need to know about the CCP. They know they're lying. They know you can't depend upon their information. So if you want to save yourself, you essentially have to self-quarantine. So you have among the wealthiest and most powerful people. This is how deadly this virus is. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how wealthy you are, you're not protected by this. And that's why the wealthiest and most powerful people in the most powerful centers in China are now self-quarantining.
There are some other unusual movements by the Chinese government. Recently, the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology released guidelines on safety and management of the viral labs. And Xi Jinping also made comments about accelerating biosafety legislation. So what's your read on this? I mean, why do they make such a sensitive announcement at such sensitive time?
I pray to God every night that this virus actually came from a bat or from a bird, and that it came to a human transmission and then human to human, that it actually is something of the physical world. Because those people and those voices that are out there, they're saying there's something about that P4 lab. It's not a random thing that the one lab in China, a pathogen 4 lab at the highest levels, built by France after SARS to help the Chinese people find vaccines for more SARS-like virus. It's not by chance that that's in Wuhan. The only one in all China is relatively close to where the market was. We got to pray that it's not something that either came out of trying to work on a vaccine and leaked out of the lab, or it was part of a biological weapons program. The disturbing thing about the CCP is the moves they're making now, talk about biological lab safety and things like that, concern me. Also, some of the rumors they're trying to start that the CIA was in back of this start to concern me. The people in China and the expatriate Chinese should understand that the Chinese Communist Party has a terrible record when it comes to biological weapons, okay? And they're hiding and lying of their biological weapons program. So you have many voices in the West now, Senator Tom Cotton, Bill Gertz, Miles Guo, and others that are sitting there going, it's all lies and it came out of their weapons program. I think we ought to pray that it was natural, because that means it's going to be easier to find a vaccine. There are many things about this virus that are quite concerning. Okay, number one is the asymptomatic period. You know, many people have caught it have said, hey, the person I actually caught it from didn't have any symptoms.
That's right.
Dr. Li, the great hero of Wuhan, he was the whistleblower. He was the one that the Chinese Communist Party, in their devil nature, tried to make him sign a thing saying he was a rumor monger. They tried to ruin his career. They were going to throw him in prison. It turns out he was right. He was a truth teller. He was a whistleblower. If they had listened to Dr. Li and his cohorts of 8 doctors back in December, they might have gotten a grip on this thing. But what they cared about is their power, and they said, no, you're a rumor monger. You had to sign these documents that said Dr. Li basically had to say he was lying. Dr. Li then went back to, when he was basically exonerated by the Supreme Court of China, he went back to the hospital to volunteer to work again, okay, to help this. And he says later, when he was dying in his last interview with the New York Times, he said, I made a mistake. I got careless. He took off his hazmat suit and didn't have all the thing when he worked on an 82-year-old patient that had no symptoms. And he caught the disease from her, and he was dead 10 days later. And I understand that the doctor, the head medical professional in Wuchang Hospital, I've been told, I haven't verified it, that he also caught this from someone that was asymptomatic. So right now we don't know, and one of the reasons we don't know is that the CCP is not allowing the world's top virus hunters in there to check this out. Everybody's depending on information they give, and you can't depend on anything the CCP gives you because they lie as easily as they draw breath.
Mm-hmm. You know, the BBC did an interview with a doctor who was treating the first patient of this coronavirus outbreak, and this man, he's like an older man.
Yes,
and
patient zero.
Patient zero. We don't know if it's patient zero, but just call him patient zero. He is bedridden. He doesn't have any mobility. He doesn't have any. I mean, obviously, he didn't go to the seafood market. But the interesting thing is, the doctor will not reveal like who he has contacted with, because this man cannot get this virus by himself, right? We know he's not related to the market, but who he has contacted with, the doctor wouldn't reveal. So I think that's kind of telling, right?
It's telling, and it's unacceptable. The world's now, 31 nations in the world have this. The world's economy is about to basically lock down because of the Chinese, the interlocked nature of the global supply system, the global supply chain coming out of China. One belt, one road, things you and I have talked about many times. This is what Senator Tom Cotton has to say. Senator Tom Cotton says, it's not incumbent upon the world to come in and find this information and keep asking questions. It's incumbent upon the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing and the rulers, okay, to come forward and have the world come in right now to both assist the Chinese people and to help protect the safety of the world. This shows you something we have said for years and years and years and years. The Chinese Communist Party is a danger to the Chinese people, and more importantly, they're a danger to all mankind. They think like gangsters, they're a bunch of thugs, and now they've got this situation they either created or if they didn't create it and it was natural, they suppressed the information about it and lied about it to keep their own power. Either way, they have helped destroy China. And now in doing this, they're starting to destroy the entire world. That's why they have to be held accountable.
You know, the WHO expert went to China yesterday without the American experts. So, I mean, the American government has been pressing the Chinese government several times. Why do you think, what are they afraid of? What are they trying to hide?
They're afraid of two things. Number one, they're afraid to show the outside world we need the foreign devils. We need America. America's the enemy. America is the enemy of the Chinese people. America is the enemy of the Chinese Communist Party. America is the enemy of China. So they don't want to, if they have to have the foreign devils come in, they're afraid they lose the mandate of heaven. They've lost their legitimacy because they had to, in a panic, depend upon the Americans to come in and save them. Number two, and more importantly, they understand that when the rest of the world and the top doctors, including Dr. Gabriel Leung from Hong Kong, when they get there, they're going to understand that, number one, either this came out of a biological weapons plan, or if it didn't, you guys lied about it, and you didn't focus on Dr. Li and these other doctors, you might have been able to stop this in December. And that's when you're going to find patient zero. Was he really the first patient, or was it in November, or was it in October? Okay, that's what they're petrified about. They've always been petrified of one thing, the truth. They can't tell the truth. This is how they've suppressed and destroyed the Tibetan Buddhists. This is what they've done in East Turkestan with the Uyghurs. This is what they've done with the Falun Gong. This is what they've done with the underground Christians. This is what they've done with the underground Catholic Church. This is what they've done to the Chinese people. All they have done is lie and suppress for decades and decades and decades, and they got away with it. And they got away with it for one reason, that the Western capitalists and companies made so much money on the suppression of the Chinese people that everybody just looked the other way and said, yeah, okay, the Chinese people, heck with them. Okay? Now that it's become the world's problem, right? Now that the supply chain has made it a world problem, now that people are sick in Iran, in the most sacred city of Qom, now that people in Lombardy, in the most wealthy part of Italy now have an outbreak, okay? Now that there's an outbreak in Canada, now that there's an outbreak in the United States, now that 31 nations have this, right? And it looks like it could spread throughout other nations. Now it's the world's problem. Now everybody's saying, hey, I thought the Chinese guys, they told me it was only 70,000 and a couple thousand dead. What do you mean it may be hundreds of thousands or millions, What do you mean they don't have it under control? Now that all their lies are being exposed every day, and you know why? She is right. The virus is a demon. And the demon cannot allow to hide. This demon virus is exposing the Chinese Communist Party for all their lies and misrepresentations and their suppression and brutal put down of the Chinese people, of every ethnicity, of every religious belief, of every organization out there. They're now being held accountable for that.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? I think the suspicion of the origin of this virus is not going to go away for a while. And, the head of the Wuhan Viral Lab, Dr. Shi Zhengli, she and a bunch of American researchers published an article in 2015 in UK's Natural Medicine that they synthesized a new virus that combines the coronaviruses from bats with the existing SARS virus, making this new virus more pathogenic than the existing SARS virus and able to transmit to humans. And the American government terminated this research because they think this new virus is a public health threat. We're not aware of whether Dr. Shi has ever terminated her side of the research. But at least, such man-made high pathogenic virus has existed in that lab, in the Wuhan lab. So if the rumor is true, if the truth is really the lab-constructed virus got out, how do you think the world will react to it?
If that is true, the Chinese Communist Party is over. That's why look, we don't know if it's true or not true. Here's what we do know. There's enough information coming out, enough uncertainty. We can't have uncertainty. China has been around for 10,000 years. You may lose China because of this virus. This spread of this virus may destroy and kill enough people or destroy the economy that China as we know it may not survive, right? It looks like right now, and they're the ones that admit that we don't have control of it, and we're 8 weeks into this. And the experts say, hey, if the quarantine doesn't work, it just spreads, right? And the mathematics is it doubles every 6.2 days. Well, Dr. Gabriel Leung, just his mathematics says it's going to run through at least May. That's over 1 billion people. So the question gets to be, we have to have all information out there and we have to have it all down. So it doesn't have just to be rumor. It doesn't have to be people saying, hey, I saw a report here or here or here. Senator Tom Cotton sums it up. It's incumbent upon the Chinese Communist Party to have the world's experts get into Wuhan, talk to the experts. They have a new major general in the PLA. I think her name is Wen Che, right? Wen Che, who's the senior, Shen Wei, who's the senior biological weapons expert for China, is now in charge of the situation there. She has to invite in the world so we get all the information and find out what is actually going on there. We need to get our understanding of this virus, and we needed to do it today. Mm-hmm. And why do we need to do it? We need to do it to help save the Chinese people of all this immense suffering they're going through, right? The psychological damage, the scars. China is such a society built upon the family. And part of the part when your ancestors pass away, your grieving process and the burial rites and everything that goes is endemic to thousands of years of Chinese society. And now when they go door to door, when Vice Premier Sun, her mandate, she goes door to door and they knock on your door and take your temperature. If they deem you have the virus, you go to a quarantine center, not to a hospital. And what you do is your family never sees you again. You leave through the back to an ambulance when you're dead, and they take you to cremate you, and your ashes are just then thrown somewhere, right? The psychological scars on the Chinese people are going to be very deep because of this. So this means it's incumbent upon the CCP, and I will tell the CCP, and they know that I'm one of their sworn enemies, but they have to understand something. If they continue to suppress information, the world is going to unite, every nation in the world, and say these guys are dangerous. They're a danger to the Chinese people, right? They're a danger to the country of China, and they're dangerous to the world, and they must be removed.
Before the coronavirus epidemic stops, I think China is already having a humanitarian crisis. I don't know how many of those footages if you have seen.
I've seen hours of them.
Yes.
It's heart-rending.
So, yeah, I wonder if the world's, mainstream media will get on top of this and say this.
The mainstream media is not going to get on top of it. The mainstream media covers for the Chinese Communist Party. If you see the mainstream media's coverage of this, it's embarrassing. All they do is repeat the same lies, and maybe every now and again. I saw today on Christian TV where they picked up my interview with Miles Guo, and they're trying to get it out there to try to get humanitarian aid to the people of China. I went on Fox 2 weeks ago now, and I said 3 things have to happen immediately by the Chinese Communist Party. Number 1, the firewall must come down. It must come down. The people of China, the citizens of China, the decent, hardworking, old 100 names in China have to be able to communicate to the world. They have to get out there and tell them what their situation is. The world has to see this unfiltered by the Chinese Communist Party. And right now, there is no justification, no moral justification to have the firewall up. This is an emergency, and it's a humanitarian crisis. The firewall must come down, and any American company that's providing technology or capital or personnel to keep that firewall up is going to burn in hell, okay? Because now they are just prolonging the suffering of the Chinese people. That's number 1. Number 2, and I said this a couple weeks ago, the Chinese Communist Party must take the best doctors from the world, from the CDC, the World Health Organization, from the Imperial College in London, from Hong Kong University, Dr. Gabriel Leung, the top virus hunters, the best, have to be allowed to get into Wuhan and Hubei province and see and report back exactly what the problem is and what their recommendations are. And number 3, the Chinese Communist Party has to be able to accept doctors and nurses from all over the world that would volunteer, military or otherwise, to go to Wuhan and go to Hubei. Because right now we see, I think there's 5,000 doctors and nurses that are infected. Okay? The new crisis you have is a collapse of the public health system in the central province and in Wuhan city. If that collapses, you can have tens of millions of people die. And that is something the CCP can avoid by taking nurses and doctors from all over the world and let them go to those central things. Until the government does that, to me, it's showing that 2 things. Number 1, they don't care about the Chinese people. They don't care how many people die. And number 2, they don't care about people throughout the world. What they care about is what they've always cared about, and that is their hold on power and their hold on wealth.